This video and every video on this channel is made possible by your support on patreon.com/616entertainment. I couldn't do this without you, and your contributions keep this channel alive. You can also grab an official shirt over on prowrestlingtees.com/616entertainment. In part 3 of the history of God of War, we close the book on the journey of Kratos. The ghost of Sparta was never able to reunite with his departed wife and daughter, but with Zeus dead and Olympus destroyed, the end of vengeance had finally come. A blood trail leading away into the raging seas was our last image before it all faded to black. But hold on. Yes, there would be a new journey to come nearly 10 years later, but that's a whole new world. A whole new world that we're not ready to jump into just yet. I did say that we closed the book on the journey of Kratos. Yeah, I did say that. But we've got to open that book one more time. We may have read the final chapter, but you know how these things go, right? These evolving, multi-passage stories with all the twists and turns you can swing a blade at. There are chapters we never read. Earlier chapters that were only uncovered a little later on to add a little extra color and depth to the world. Yes, sir, I'm talking, of course, about prequels. God of War, Chains of Olympus, God of War, Ghost of Sparta, and God of War Ascension all take place before the book was closed, before the death of Zeus, two of them before the death of Ares. So cast your mind back before Olympus fell, before the Titans were resurrected, before all of it. Welcome to the history of God of War Part 4, the origins of Kratos. What's up, Dan-Dans? My name is Ian. Thank you very much for joining me here today. Hey, I think you know the drill by now, right? We're about to spend the next hour or so diving deep into the creation, production, backstory, and continued history of God of War. So grab a snack, grab a drink, and get comfortable, because this is the history of God of War Part 4, the origins of Kratos. Now we've got 3 unique titles to cover here on Part 4 of the history of God of War, but there's one very, very important detail that we need to talk about right here at the top. Starting with 2008's God of War Chains of Olympus, for the first time ever, fans of the series had Kratos in the palm of their hands. You might be thinking, so what? Kratos had Kratos in the palm of his hand too. Not like that, asswipe. I'm talking about the PlayStation Portable. Sony's first ever handheld was an absolute powerhouse, man. Released in North America in March of 2005, the PSP absolutely changed everything I thought I knew about handheld gaming. Yes, it was 2005, but the only handheld I'd ever owned was a Game Boy Pocket. A red one, as a matter of fact. I got it for Christmas along with Pokemon Red. This is my actual Game Boy Pocket and my actual copy of Pokemon Red too. Yes, they still both work. Portable gaming, in my mind, still looked like this. 8 bits on a teeny tiny little monochromatic screen. I had friends who were fortunate enough to own Game Boy Colors and even the 32-bit Game Boy Advance, but not me, no sir. Pokemon Red was still the name of the game. So when I was at another family's barbecue, or whatever the hell it was that was going on, and my buddy Danny pulled out a PSP, I was astounded. He was playing Madden 06, and I could not wrap my head around what I was seeing. Yes, I realize it's now 2022. We've had the PlayStation Vita, the Nintendo Switch is like 5 years old at this point, but in 2005? Get out of here. The PSP was a game changer. This was another level. Having my own PSP became my focus. I didn't care how hard I had to work, what sort of work it was, it didn't matter. Whatever it was would be worth it. Long story short, it took a while, but I eventually had a PlayStation Portable of my very own. Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, Silent Hill Origins, Killzone Liberation, Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. Dude, the PSP was life. I'm getting super nostalgic just writing this script. What an era that was. The PlayStation Portable was a runaway hit for Sony, eventually selling over 80 million units when it was all said and done. So how does Kratos enter the PSP fold, you might ask? Sony Santa Monica were all hands on deck 24/7 on the mainline numbered trilogy, meaning they were not responsible for these portable titles. Enter Ready at Dawn Studios. Founded in 2003, this relatively new team had only one game under their belt when they approached Sony and Santa Monica Studio with the pitch of creating a God of War title exclusively for the PSP. The game in question was the highly successful PSP exclusive offshoot of Naughty Dog's Jak and Daxter franchise, simply titled Daxter. The game sold over 4 million copies at retail and received rave reviews upon release. That's a pretty short resume, sure, it's only one game, but holy hell. Why wouldn't Sony and Santa Monica trust them with their baby, right? And that's exactly what happened. Under the direction of Rue Virasoria, with Santa Monica Studios' Cory Barlog overseeing the creative direction, God of War Chains of Olympus quietly entered production shortly after the release of the original God of War. I remember exactly how I became aware of this new installment. Shortly after purchasing God of War 2, I found myself looking through its high-quality, full-color, deeply informative instruction manual. Remember these? After skimming through all of the tips and appreciating the artwork, I flipped it over, only to find this. Holy shit. To say I couldn't wait would be an understatement. If you were wondering back then, or maybe you're still wondering now because you've never seen it, how the hell is God of War going to translate well to a handheld? I don't think you're out of line. God of War has always been so graphically impressive. The series has always leaned so much on scale to help paint these grandiose pictures. So if you could sit back and say, I really don't know how this franchise could possibly translate well to a smaller screen, I think that's a perfect amount of healthy skepticism. But hey, rather than try to explain it to you in painstaking detail, I'll just show it to you. I mean, this is a video series after all, right? Here you go, Dan-Dan's God of War Chains of Olympus on the PSP. At the time, in March of 2008, this game was lauded as probably the best looking, most graphically impressive title on the platform. I know, it's 2022 now. You might have trouble wrapping your head around those words given the Switch Pros and Steam Decks of today, but this was 100% insanity at that time. I'd also like to point out that what you're seeing is obviously a recording, blown up for a larger screen. In hand though, actually running natively on a PlayStation Portable, it looked even better. Much better, as a matter of fact. Shout out to Spartan B Pun for this footage, as it really conveys what the hell I'm talking about. Ready at Dawn Studios, much like they had with Naughty Dog's Baby and Jak and Daxter, had done it again, translating Sony Santa Monica's star perfectly to the world of portables. So what the hell is God of War Chains of Olympus about, anyway? What's the story here? Well, I think it's high time we break out the timeline. Yes sir, when you step into prequel territory, you have to start breaking down what took place and when. Chains of Olympus, for now, is the earliest tale ever told, taking place 5 years after Kratos was tricked into killing his family, 5 years into his servitude of the gods on his quest for forgiveness, 5 years before the original God of War. Our Ghost of Sparta is out doing what he does, fighting battles, killing opposing leaders, and toppling gigantic, monstrous foes when everything goes a little sideways. Helios, the god of the sun, who Kratos will go on to have a little chat with in God of War 3, has gone missing. Without his light, Morpheus swoops in, covering the entire world in darkness, casting the remaining gods into a deep, deep sleep, where obviously something terrible will happen. Athena, as always, puts Kratos to work, tasking him with locating Helios in order to return him to the skies, so that this fog of evil may be vanquished. Across his travels, the Spartan continues to hear a faint but familiar melody in the distance, a melody that is eventually revealed to be the favorite song of Calliope, Kratos' dearly departed daughter. Every time Kratos hears the song, it becomes louder and louder, and the dream of being with his child once again only fuels his fire to press on. We go on to find out that Helios didn't just disappear. He was captured by the once banished Titan, Atlas, who was freed from the pits of Tartarus by Persephone, the unwilling wife of Hades. Her plan is to destroy the Pillar of the World, which would not only bring an end to Olympus as we know it, but forever extinguish the souls contained in the underworld. The underworld where Kratos, at the end of the game, is finally reunited with his daughter. Before making her true intentions known, Persephone offers Kratos his one true desire, to be reunited with his child. It's a hell of a scene, man. Kratos lets it all go. He casts aside his weapons. He gives away his power. He is stripped down to the very core of his being. A man, a mere mortal, reunited with his daughter in the fields of Elysium, where the worthy and righteous souls of the peaceful may exist infinitely, separated from the violence and despair of Tartarus. It is only after the reunion that the blinders are removed. Persephone was merely extinguishing one of the greatest threats to her plan. Kratos has a choice to make. He could stay here in Elysium with Calliope, but for what? The toppling of the Pillar of the World would erase everything as we know it. Option B is to suit back up, regain his powers, and thwart this dastardly deed. But leaving Elysium is a one-way street. Stopping Atlas and Persephone would mean Calliope's soul would remain intact, happily going about her days, but Kratos could never return. In the end, the Spartan makes the ultimate personal sacrifice, thrusting himself back into the fight so that his daughter would remain at peace. Persephone is cut down. Remember how she was dead in God of War 3? Well... And Atlas is imprisoned in Hades once more, this time replacing the Great Pillar, holding the entire world up on his own. Kratos is brought back to the land of the living by the returning Helios and Athena, and is left at the very cliff he would hurl himself from 5 years later, after the gods refused to erase the torturous memories of his past. How's that for a prequel? Goodness gracious! Now you might be feeling like we just flew through that story, or at least we flew through it in comparison to how long it took to tell the tale of some of these prior titles, but there's a reason for that. When you step into prequel territory, there's a balance that must be struck. If you factor in every character that the audience already recognizes, if you revisit every set piece the audience has already seen, the audience starts to wonder, why the hell haven't we heard about these stories before? Telling a story where the gods are asleep, where the world of the living is largely shrouded in shadow, where the focus is on Kratos and his daughter, it provides the perfect cover for how a story like this went mostly under the radar. These events may be smaller in scope, but they are certainly not lesser in personal significance. I mean, for God's sake, there's a super emotional moment right at the end where we're faced with a minigame. Sure, we've seen minigames before. Rotate the stick to decapitate an enemy. Tap the buttons in sequence to land the killing blow. But we'd never seen anything like this. Kratos knows he must save the soul of his daughter, even if it means he'll never see her again. But she won't let him leave. It's up to the player to mash the circle button in order to pry our terrified, heartbroken daughter from our side. This part sucks. And I mean that in the best way. It's great writing, great design. It just sucks that we have to do this to Calliope. After ruining the plans of Persephone and Atlas, the Titan is chained down, forced to carry the weight of the world. Atlas challenges the Spartan as to why he would trust the word of the gods, and through his answer, we don't hear the vaunted and feared ghost of Sparta. We hear an emotionally battered, desperate, and broken man.
What good is the promise of an Olympian? It is all I have, Atlas!
Goosebumps, man. And let me just throw in here that the boss fights with Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, are awesome. And yes, I said boss fights. There are 2 of them. Because in the first encounter, Charon straight up wins. He defeats Kratos and chains him up in Tartarus. How about that? I mean, Kratos finds his way back to Charon and obliterates him in devastating fashion, but still, what a moment here for the ferryman of the River Styx. Bravo. The Persephone fight kinda sucks though, I'm sad to say. Her fighting style makes her a chore to deal with. But why dwell on that when we can talk about breathtaking moments like traversing an environment dwarfed by the Titans in the background? That, the battle with the Basilisk in the opening scene. Come on, man. Just because God of War was on the PSP didn't mean it was willing to sacrifice the sights and sounds that make the franchise what it is. It was March 4th, 2008 that God of War Chains of Olympus hit store shelves. If you couldn't tell by my writing thus far, yes, the game carried the mantle well, broadening the franchise's horizons beyond the home console market. Critics were blown away with what Ready at Dawn were able to accomplish with their take on the series, lauding the game's graphics, sound design, story, and even its control scheme. Commercially, Chains of Olympus hit it big, selling 3.2 million copies at retail. In June of 2008, Sony released the God of War Chains of Olympus PSP Entertainment Pack, which included not only a copy of the game, but an exclusive blood red PSP with the Ghost of Sparta emblazoned on the back. God of War Chains of Olympus proved that even on a smaller screen, this franchise could not only survive, but thrive into the future. Even focused on stories from events long past, there was still plenty to uncover from this world and from these characters. In early 2010, God of War 3 closed the book on the story of Kratos, as we've previously discussed. But just 8 months later, in November of 2010, fans were treated to yet another PSP exclusive prequel that would further flesh out the story of Kratos. God of War, Ghost of Sparta takes place between God of War 1 and 2. The game tells the tale of Kratos' long-lost brother, Deimos. If you're thinking, wait a minute, a long-lost brother made up out of the blue this late in the series? What is this, some Uncharted 4 shit? No sir! No sir, the reveal of Kratos' brother happened all the way back in 2005. Yes, in God of War 1. The Birth of the Beast video, which is a bonus feature on the disc, informs the viewer that Kratos and his brother were separated as children. The entire rest of the tale laid out here actually didn't get used. The story served up in Ghost of Sparta totally rewrites this whole thing, but still, Kratos' brother, Deimos, has indeed existed this entire time, and now we're going to meet him. Ghost of Sparta is a very personal, very honed-in story as far as this franchise is concerned. In the original game, we're killing our first god. In the second, we challenge Zeus. In Chains of Olympus, the pillar of the world is being threatened. These are all huge deals across the board. Things that can change the grand scheme as we know it. Kratos' journey to find his brother, who he's been informed is actually still alive and being held captive in the domain of death, which is a purgatory-esque plane of existence in between the land of mortals and the underworld. This story doesn't entail the entirety of humanity hanging in the balance. It's not a world-ending angle, you know what I mean? Don't be mistaken. I'm not saying it's unnecessary. I'm not saying it doesn't fit in with these other adventures where the stakes couldn't be higher. I'm applauding this decision. I'm applauding the creative integrity of looking at the state of the franchise and saying, wait, let's try something a little different. Ghost of Sparta's director, Dana Jan, along with the game's writer, Cory Barlog, not only delivered another fantastic narrative in their own right, but along with the rest of the team at Ready at Dawn, pushed the PSP to its critical limit. Now I know, I did say that the story of Ghost of Sparta is a little more zoomed in. It's a little more personal and focused on Kratos himself, rather than this big, overarching worldwide threat. But that is not to say that we have any shortage of deadly boss fights, awesome set pieces, and more. Let's dive into this story itself. Long ago, an oracle prophesied that a marked warrior would bring forth the destruction of Olympus. One night, two shadowy figures burst into a Spartan village, looking for the child they believed to be the one who would begin the end. Due to his elaborate birthmark, the larger of the mysterious figures, who was clearly Ares, the other being Athena, pushed Kratos aside and kidnapped his younger brother, Deimos. The young Kratos gave it all he had, but at such a young age, was no match for a god. And would you look at that? I think we've all been wondering where that scar in his eye came from, right? Deimos was brought to the domain of the dead, a purgatory, a place where no mortal man nor god would ever dare step foot to live out his days in limbo. The domain of the dead isn't a barren wasteland without a ruler. No, this place is governed by Thanatos, the god of the dead. Thanatos existed long before the Olympians reigned supreme. Thanatos predates even the Titans. His dark legacy stretches further back than anyone truly knows. Not even Zeus, the king of the gods, enters this land. But that was then, the kidnapping and everything. That happened a long time ago. Let's move up to the here and now. Kratos has killed Ares and is well aware of the fact that his visions will never fade. There is no peace with the gods, and that's why Kratos immediately tells Athena to shove it when she's like, hey, don't go looking into your past. There's bad shit you don't want to know about, and honestly, I don't want you to know about it either. Kratos heads straight to Atlantis, which is awesome that we're finally seeing Atlantis, because this city that Poseidon calls home was indeed cut from God of War 2. Which I covered back in part 2 of this series. Many of the environments we play through here in Ghosts of Sparta use the assets that were created for God of War 2 back in 2007. It's so cool that this got to see the light of day. The fight with the Scylla is exhilarating. I'm not sure you know this about me, but I love gigantic sea creatures. And getting pulled underwater and all this, yeah man, this is awesome. I mean, I think it's awesome. Poseidon probably didn't appreciate it because all of the damage caused by this fight winds up sinking his beautiful city. Kratos winds up entering a doorway into his past and coming across, are you ready for this? His mother, Callisto. Not Callisto, Callisto. This is our main setup. Hey, your brother's alive. Go find him before it's too late. Your dad brought me here, by the way. There's a tease here regarding Kratos nearly finding out who his father is, but his mother transforms before she can tell him. Don't you hate when you have to kill your mom because she morphed into a horrible beast in front of your very eyes? I'm being silly, but this is actually a heavy moment. The trek out of Atlantis has us coming across the chained up Titan, Thera, and it's from her that we obtain Thera's Bane, which allows us to apply fire damage to the blades of Athena. This is fucking cool. This is the 5th God of War game we're playing, and this feels fresh. You've gotta respect that. This is where Kratos should be clued into how daunting and dangerous this quest will be. The daughter of Thanatos, Aranis, ravages a city, leaving behind only 2 soldiers to convey the message to stay away, turn back. Beyond this point, oh my god, it's the Gravedigger again! We haven't seen him since the original God of War. The Gravedigger warns Kratos that nothing good will come from defying the gods, and these words hit so much harder now because we know this is Zeus, trying his best to deter Kratos from following his destiny. The flashbacks we experience show the relationship that Kratos and Deimos shared, that being a strong, brotherly bond. Kratos would overpower and defeat Deimos in their sparring sessions, but he didn't bully his brother, he didn't taunt him. He'd instead offer his hand and instill the message that no matter what, whether it was in battle or even in death, a Spartan stands tall. And that's a common theme here. Again, I don't want to hear about how Kratos is a one-note, constantly screaming lunatic. Aranis leaves another one of Kratos' men behind, on the brink of death to taunt him. But that's enough of his men killed. Once cornered, Kratos murders the daughter of Thanatos in a boss fight that is highly cinematic and extremely impressive. Forget the fact that this is on the PSP. This boss fight would have been memorable in either of the PlayStation 2 mainline entries. But yeah, killing Thanatos' daughter, that's gonna cause some problems. Now we're already halfway through this story, and if that feels fast, Let me remind you, I did say that this is a more zoomed in, focused tale on Kratos himself. There aren't as many beats that I feel are important to cover in painstaking detail, and that might actually be a little bit of a negative. The team at Ready at Dawn went out of their way when promoting Ghost of Sparta to brag about the fact that Ghost of Sparta features 25% more gameplay than Chains of Olympus. More fights, longer fights, more gameplay. Now, I don't know who was beating down the door over at Ready at Dawn saying, we need more gameplay, we need more fights. Chains of Olympus, to me, felt perfectly paced. And if you go back and look at the reviews from back in the day, it's very rare that you're going to find anybody saying like, oh, the pacing was off. I wish there was more to do. Bigger is not always better, and more sometimes is less. As the game goes on, some of these fights feel padded out just to make the game longer. You know, towards the end, the walls come down, the doors are locked, and it's like, oh, we gotta take out all these enemies before we can continue. And they're hitting us with 3 to 4 waves of jobber enemies before they'll unlock the doors. It starts to feel like, okay, come on, I get it, let's go. Now that's not much of a complaint, but it is something I noticed as the game went on, and it's something I wanted to share with you guys. But now that that's out of the way, let's wrap up this story. After killing Aranis, Kratos returns home to Sparta. This is the first time we've actually set foot in the God of War's home city, and man, this is awesome. The camera comes in close, Kratos slows down, and we're hearing the loyal Spartans heap praise on their hero. It's tremendous. And we've had sex minigames before. Every time Kratos seems to be taking more women to bed, but I'm serious. In his hometown, the God of War nails like 10 ladies at once. What a legend. But it's not all fun and games. As he continues down the road, he flashes back to his days with his brother once again. It's obvious that this is a gaping hole in Kratos' heart. And man, is it cool to actually play as Kratos as a child. There's another slowed down moment where we stalk the Dissenter, a real piece of shit who still celebrates Ares as the God of War. This guy gets what he deserves, and I've got to say, these slower, closer moments are my favorite parts. Come on, man, the Spartans tearing down the statue of Ares so they can replace it with a statue of their new god, Lord Kratos? That's so sick. But once he enters the temple of Ares, the temple that now belongs to him, the realization strikes. Kratos had now become exactly what he despised. He never wanted to be a god. He never wanted to be bathed in the celebration of others. And coming face to face with his younger self in an attempt to gain access to the domain of the dead only drives this home. Ghost of Sparta is heavy, man. Coming across Midas, the man cursed with the touch of gold, is another heavy moment. After accidentally turning his own daughter to gold and losing everything of true value in his life, he longs for the sweet release of death. But when the time comes to take himself out, he's a coward. No problem, brother. Kratos can help you with that. He's cast into the lava, turning it to gold. So cool. Battling hordes of seaborne enemies while our ship literally circles the drain of the now sunken city of Atlantis, I'm telling you, God of War continues to deliver memorable moment after memorable moment. Kratos finds passage into the domain of death, the land of purgatory ruled over by Thanatos. Deimos is found, luckily still alive, and chained up. Kratos cuts his brother down, and this is no warm welcome. Deimos blames Kratos for his capture. He says he'll never forgive him and attempts to kill him on the spot. Deimos shouting, "You were supposed to protect me!" cuts deep, especially if you have siblings in real life. Deimos actually gets the better of Kratos here, surprisingly. I mean, you could argue that Kratos was holding back and that this was a one-sided war, but it doesn't matter because Thanatos steps in and takes Deimos away. Where does he bring him? Well, he takes him to the Suicide Bluffs, the very spot where Kratos tried to take his own life after learning the visions of his past would never fade. Talk about a low blow. Kratos rescues Deimos again in a scene straight out of their pasts, and now the brothers are on the same page, battling against the god of death. In the end, the brothers triumph over Thanatos, but Deimos doesn't live to see the end of the fight, sacrificing himself in order to seal the deal. After Thanatos is killed, Kratos carries his departed brother's body to the top of the Suicide Bluffs. And who's waiting atop the bluffs? None other than the Gravedigger. Kratos lays his brother to rest and once again questions taking his own life. It's just tragedy after tragedy, man. But the closing line really sends it home.
By the gods, what have I become?
Death, the destroyer of worlds.
After the credits, we get another peek at the Gravedigger, who this time lays Callisto, Kratos and Deimos' mom, to rest. In between mother and son would lie one last empty grave. How about that ending, right? Zeus taking the shape of the Gravedigger, burying his family one by one. You know, we are delving deep into the past of Kratos at this point, but these are not soulless, pointless cash grabs by any means. Before we close out Ghost of Sparta's chapter, I want to ask you a question. Is it just me, or does Ghost of Sparta look heavily influenced by another PlayStation IP? This is Uncharted, through and through. Kratos has been climbing walls from the very beginning. He started swinging in God of War 2, but Ghost of Sparta feels like I'm playing as Nathan Drake at certain points. Sliding down these myriad inclines and timing precisely when to hop from one set piece to another. I don't know, man. I'm getting Uncharted vibes. Big time. When it came down to it, God of War Ghost of Sparta was another hit for Sony's resident Spartan. Critically acclaimed once again. Over 1 million copies sold once again. Ghost of Sparta, much like its predecessor, also received its very own console immortalization. Deimos was even featured as a playable skin in God of War 3, which is cool as hell. Deimos isn't mentioned very often, and that's fair. He really didn't have a whole hell of a lot to do, but I'm glad he got his time in the spotlight. I watched that Birth of the Beast video back in 2005, damn it, and up until this point, I always felt like Kratos' brother was an incomplete, ignored chapter in the story. Shout out to Deimos, and shout out to Ready at Dawn. Now, some of you may be wondering when I'm going to cover God of War Betrayal. Others might be wondering what the hell God of War Betrayal even is. Well, it was a mobile game built exclusively for Java phones. Nothing of note happens here, and no, I'm not going to be covering it in detail. Ghost of Sparta director Dana Jan was quoted as having no idea where Betrayal lands on the God of War timeline. So, if a major player in the industry doesn't know or care, neither do I. God of War Ghost of Sparta would indeed serve as the last entry in the franchise to hit the PSP, but it would not be the last God of War game to release within the next couple years. Now, think about that. God of War 3 closed the book on the story of Kratos. Ghost of Sparta was the second time we had delved deep into the past in prequel territory. So where the hell would the series take us next? Nearly 3 full years later, on March 12th, 2013, fans would be treated to the release of God of War Ascension, an entry once again exclusive to the home console powerhouse that was the PlayStation 3. Now, with a subtitle like Ascension, one thing is made abundantly clear from the start. There's no number, specifically no 4, meaning this was not going to be pushing the series forward. And I mean, how could it? Again, at the end of God of War 3, Kratos was dead. And then he wasn't dead, but he was bleeding real bad in the raging seas. Look, the point is this. We're clearly not going to find out what he's been up to since he fell in the water. So, what the hell is going on here? Well, this officially calls for another look at the timeline. Let's just lay it all out on the table, shall we? God of War Chains of Olympus, up to this point, was the earliest story in the timeline. Next comes the original God of War. Here we drop in Ghost of Sparta, followed by God of War 2, and then finally God of War 3. No, I don't care about the comics or Betrayal. If you do, that's fine, but they don't matter in the grand scheme. So where does it go? How about all the way to the beginning? No, how about before the beginning? God of War Ascension, released 3 years after God of War 3, is now the very first game on the timeline. Back in 2013, when I was awaiting the release of God of War Ascension, I knew 2 things. I knew that number 1, I loved this franchise, and having another God of War game to play was gonna be awesome. But number 2, I knew that this felt unnecessary. It really felt like Ascension existed because someone from Sony called Santa Monica Studio and said, "Hey, it's been a couple years, how's about another God of War?" And I hate to say that because I clearly love this series, but I'm just being honest. That's how I felt, that's how my friends felt, that seemed to be how the gaming audience at large felt. And I honestly believe that's why God of War Ascension carries the reputation that it has. All the time on Twitter or in YouTube comments, I will see people saying, "Oh, God of War Ascension, that one sucks," right? And that's how you can tell right away who did and who did not play this game. Is God of War Ascension a good game? No. God of War Ascension is fucking great, and anybody who took the time to play it knows that. I mean, let's talk about it. We'll put a pin in the reaction and reception to the game for now and circle back later. Let's talk about how the game plays, talk about the new features, the storyline, all that good stuff. When it comes to the gameplay, for the first time in forever, combat actually does feel fairly new. Reinvigorated, one could say. There's a brand new mechanic in place where Kratos can hook one blade onto a specific enemy and hold him in place while using his other arm to swipe at the surrounding mob. This is cool as hell. Why Kratos never did this again for the rest of his life? Who knows? But that's a prequel problem. As a developer, you've got to introduce new things, even if the story is from long ago. The balance comes in with the player just accepting it, moving on, I guess. On top of the new grapple gimmick is the ability to pick up the swords, clubs, spears, and other assorted weapons that our deceased enemies leave behind. This is also cool as hell, and adds a nice new piece to the puzzle. Why didn't Kratos ever pick up anyone else's weapons for the rest of his life? Again, it's a prequel problem. But maybe this one is easier to explain. I mean, if I have the Blades of Chaos attached to my wrist 24/7, I probably wouldn't be impressed by some Jabroni Jabinski's hogshit hammer or suck-ass spear, right? There are some really, really cool new enemies introduced here as well. The Elephantar is maybe the coolest enemy design across the entire franchise, and their death is delivered when Kratos cuts their skull open and exposes their brain to the elements. Holy shit! I adore elephants in real life, and even having to fight these guys makes me sad. The Ice and Fire Talos are very similar to the Big Hammer Boys from God of War 3, but they've got a cool new look and elementally focused attacks. The Cobra Gorgon is a new Medusa-esque pain in the ass, and holy jeez is their kill shot horrific. On the gameplay front, shit, I don't think the series has ever felt better. And that's saying a ton, considering the sacred ground we're standing on. But now on to one of the main selling points for Ascension. Yeah, I was talking about new mechanics and new enemies and all that good stuff, but it doesn't get much more new than this. For the first time in franchise history, God of War Ascension introduces multiplayer. In this era, 2010, 2011, 2012, 13, it wasn't uncommon to see games that never featured or really never needed multiplayer to have a multiplayer component added on into a sequel at some point down the line. BioShock 2 had multiplayer. Dead Space 3's entire fucking campaign was meant to be played with a partner, which made zero sense whatsoever, but that's what the industry was doing at the time. Dead Space was a survival horror game set in the dark, lonely, tight corridors of the Ishimura. The only weapons you had for survival were your own instincts and a couple engineering tools. But by the time Dead Space 3 came around, EA said, nah, put this one outdoors, charge for an online pass, play with a friend, and team up. What the hell was this? Sorry, I love Dead Space and Dead Space 2, so Dead Space 3 getting fucked up the way it was really pisses me off. Look, I'll move on. But this really paints the picture of what I'm trying to say here. Dozens of once exclusively single-player games were having multiplayer components stitched into their fabric for seemingly no reason other than a little bit of this. You know what I mean? The question is, was God of War Ascension ruined by this multiplayer component? In short, no, not at all. And here's why. They didn't Dead Space 3 this game. Kratos doesn't have a partner. He doesn't have a best friend all of a sudden. This isn't a co-op story. God of War Ascension's multiplayer mode is completely separated from the story mode, which is awesome. In all, there are 5 distinct match types in multiplayer, all with their own rules, goals, and winning conditions. Players take control of an Oathbreaker. I'll explain what that means in detail once we get to the storyline, but basically you pick a fighter of your choice. And jump in to capture the flag, death matches, all sorts of mayhem. Your Oathbreaker of choice was upgradable with new gear, new weapons, you get the picture. And I think it's worth mentioning that there was a full prequel comic for Ascension's multiplayer that painted a deeper, broader picture of who these guys were and what was going on here. Yes, that'd be a prequel to a prequel. I'm a single player guy myself, so I think I only messed with this like 1 or 2 times, but it was definitely fun. And this might shock you, but these servers are still live today. They're not very active, as you might imagine, but there are indeed hardcores who still link up and hop into battle together nearly 10 years later. And now that we've come this far, maybe I should get into how God of War Ascension came to be, right? The development process is a pretty important part of the whole deal, isn't it? We'll start off with some trivia. You tell me. Did the director of God of War 3, Stig Asmussen, return to the chair to direct Ascension? Answer? No, he didn't. Meaning that yes indeed, across 6 games, every single entry has had a new director helming the project. That's insane. That's gotta be a record of some sort. Guiding the ship this time would be Todd Pappy, who had previously served as God of War 3's design director, amongst myriad other projects. Under the guidance of Todd Pappy, T.C. Carson returns for the 6th time as the mighty Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, only this outing would serve as his last. I haven't really gone out of my way to express how excellent this man was in his portrayal of Kratos across the history of God of War, and that's because we still had so much ground to cover. I didn't want to beat you guys over the head with, he's great, but this is it, man. The final outing for the original voice of the God of War. Mr. Carson, you absolutely killed it, and I, along with everybody out there watching, are raising our figurative glasses to you, sir. What a legend. Story has been an extremely important piece of the God of War puzzle since its inception. Up to this point, I have talked your ears off for hours telling these tales from top to bottom. God of War Ascension was criticized in the story department upon release, but I don't think it's because the story itself is bad. I think it's just hard to swallow another 9 to 10 hour epic that takes place before the events of everything we've already seen. We don't have to worry about our main character dying. We already know where his loose ends of his familial bonds are tied up. We know where this story concludes. When there are no life-threatening, world-ending stakes on the line for a 3rd time, you really start to wonder, is this all necessary? Rather than go along with the reveals in order and play along with the gathering of all the pieces, I'm going to lay it out for you from a bird's eye perspective. God of War Ascension's story follows Kratos going through the process of escaping imprisonment at the hands of the Furies, as he was locked up for breaking his blood oath to Ares. Orcos, the son of Ares and the Queen Fury, is aiding our Ghost of Sparta in his journey because he was once Kratos' own Oathkeeper. But after witnessing Ares tricking Kratos into killing his family, he has denounced his calling. Many of the big reveals don't land very impactfully because it's all stuff that doesn't matter in the grand scheme. For instance, we learn that the reason Ares answered Kratos' call in the original God of War wasn't because he gave a shit about Kratos. It was because Ares was planning on overthrowing Zeus, and he saw Kratos as a viable right-hand man. This doesn't hit very hard because number one, at the time Ascension dropped, we killed Ares 8 years ago. Dude is old news. Number 2, Ghost of Sparta taught us that Ares initially kidnapped Deimos, thinking he was the marked warrior, the chosen one. And at no point did Kratos ever mention, "Hey, you took my brother, asshole." So all of this prequel stuff is really just creating plot holes that didn't exist before. When it's all said and done, Kratos kills the Furies. He kills Orcos because that's how he frees him from Ares, and he suffers his first nightmare. Nightmares that were initially suppressed through his blood oath to Ares. Ascension ends with Kratos beginning his path to becoming the champion of the gods, which we know is not gonna wash away the nightmares, which is why he'll turn against Zeus, yada yada. Do you see what I mean? We've gone backwards so many times now that no matter what did or didn't happen here, it's like, okay, I know where it all goes. Oh, Ares actually had a different plan? Who gives a shit? Orcos was tortured the same way Kratos was because that's how his bond to Ares was broken. Kratos is never going to mention this again for the rest of his life, so it clearly didn't make that much of an impact on him, so why should it make that much of an impact on me? And I'm not doing this storyline justice by conveying it to you the way I am, but that's not my fault. I genuinely believe that coming all the way back to the beginning, once again, did Ascension no favors in the storytelling department. I'm being 100% honest when I say this. If God of War Ascension did not release in 2013, if it actually came out in 2007 and was called God of War 2, yeah, I know if it was on the PS2, technologically it would have to be different. You get what I'm saying. Just swap the titles. If God of War Ascension was actually God of War 2, it would be lauded as one of the best in the series. I'm not even kidding. Franchise fatigue is the name of the game, and franchise fatigue is why God of War Ascension is not respected the way it should be. To illustrate what I mean by that, let me show you what we're doing here across the journey of Ascension's story. Right from the start, Kratos is imprisoned and he's battling the first Fury. This fight is awesome! It stretches across multiple settings and levels, and oh my goodness, the setting. This prison that we're running around isn't some stone structure. The very ground beneath our feet is the Hecatoncheires, the titanically large, 100-armed being who was the first to ever break an oath to Zeus. The Hecatoncheires' punishment was to become the prison of the damned, housing the souls of the Oathbreakers. If that wasn't fucking cool enough, this Fury uses her insectoid asshole friends to reanimate this gargantuan, leading to one of the most epic boss fights, maybe the most epic boss fight in the entire franchise, bar none. I maintain that if this game were slotted in somewhere else, its reputation would have been completely different. Franchise fatigue was the only thing standing in the way of Ascension achieving long-lasting greatness. I promise you that. And franchise fatigue had indeed set in. The proof was in the review scores as well as the commercial performance of Ascension, both of which were at an all-time low. Now make no mistake, Ascension sold more than 3 million units, and an average score of 8 out of 10 is nothing to sneeze at. This is still an awesome game. It's just, they say there's a point where you can have too much of a good thing, you know? This is where it might be good to mention that God of War not only had enjoyed 6 unique games of its own up to this juncture, but the outward spread and commercial growth of this IP were still expanding. In 2011, Kratos guest starred in Mortal Kombat, serving up fatalities with the likes of Sub-Zero and Scorpion. The reveal trailer for his inclusion is still unbelievably cool, by the way, and performing the aforementioned fatalities with the severed head of Medusa and the blade of Olympus will never get old. But this wasn't the Ghost of Sparta's only starring role outside of his own series, as Kratos went to war once again in 2012's PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. I actually really loved this game, so maybe that's another retrospective for another time. But I'd be a total jamoke if I didn't bring up the fact that a downloadable code to play as Zeus in All-Stars came packed in with each and every copy of God of War Ascension. Who's down for one more father versus son showdown, right? Much like its PSP predecessors, God of War Ascension would also receive its own personalized console in the shape of a blood-red, super slim PlayStation 3. Sadly, this is where the game would remain to this very day. Unlike the PSP titles, which were remastered and re-released on more powerful hardware, unlike the first 2 PS2 games, which received the same treatment, and even unlike God of War 3, which was fully remastered for the PlayStation 4, Ascension remains stranded on the PS3, with no future on the horizon. The game is streamable on PlayStation Plus, if you're a subscriber, but it's not updated in any way, nor can you download it, so your experience is at the mercy of your internet connection, which is far from ideal. God of War Ascension deserves far, far more credit than it gets. I hope that my realistic take on the game's release and the issues surrounding its placement on the timeline don't dissuade you from experiencing this one for the first time, or even going back and running through it again, as it is truly worth your time and money, I assure you. The live-action trailer alone for this one will damn near bring a tear to your eye, man. I'm serious. This is a must-have for any PlayStation 3 owner, and if you skipped this game when it released because you were just God of War'd out, that's okay. But it's finally time to do yourself a favor and give this one a go. Plus, we haven't talked about that crazy, seemingly never resolved puzzle in the early stages of the game. The one where if you interact with certain spots on the level in a certain order and revisit a painting you walked past previously, the imagery changes. When the Earth stops, the journey begins. Never again would this be mentioned nor elaborated on for the rest of the game, meaning this is something we'll just have to talk about next time. Thank you for tuning in for this, the History of God of War Part 4, The Origins of Kratos. Next time out, we will be drawing this series to a close with the History of God of War Part 5, A Brave New World. I'm going to have you ready for God of War Ragnarok, don't you worry. But that's not the only big news I have for you here today. September 30th, The History of Halloween, the full movie version, drops right here on youtube.com/616entertainment. 4.5 hours of deep diving retrospective content on our favorite horror franchise in the entire world. But it doesn't end there. All throughout October, I will be dropping brand new Halloween videos. Dandans, if you like content like this and you want to see me create more of it, patreon.com/616entertainment is where you can help me make that happen. You know, I'm recovered by the time that you're watching this, but at the time that I'm filming this, tomorrow morning I have a surgery where they're going to go into my jawbone, cut pieces out, remove impacted wisdom teeth, and take out 2 other teeth that were broken by those wisdom teeth that didn't fit. Cost me a lot of money, it's going to hurt a lot, and if you want to help keep this business alive, patreon.com/616entertainment is the place to do it. Until next time, we love you, and we will see you next time. Ready to go?